And good evening, everybody. This is Culver City Planning Commission for May 12th, 2021. And Madam Secretary, could we have a roll call, please?
Yes.
Commissioner Relman?
I'm here.
Commissioner Augusta?
Here.
Commissioner Barba?
Here.
Vice Chair Sales?
Here.
Chair Von Cannon?
Here.
Thank you. We have 5 commissioners present.
Thank you. Let's move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. So if everybody would, let's try to say it together. So ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You should.
Very good. I don't believe we have any. Ruth, if you would remind everyone on how to comment on the agenda.
Yes, members of the public may submit comments before the meeting in 2 different ways. You could submit an email to the city planner, who is a project manager. The email can be found on the public notices and or the mailers that are sent out for each item. This is if it's applicable. Our second is the new e-comment function. You can find this by going to culvercity.org/agendas. You look for the meeting, and there's an e-comment button on the right-hand side. You click on the button and you look for your item, and you hit submit with your comment. Emails or e-comments that are received will be read into the public record during the meeting, and we also forward them to the planning commissioners and staff. For comments during the meeting, we now have a new process that attendees can register in advance, and you identify the agenda item that you wish to speak on when you indicate on the section of the agenda followed by the number. So at the start of each agenda item, the staff will read aloud the names of those who have been registered in advance, and you will be requested to speak on the agenda item. For those of you who did not register, you can still participate. You just need to raise when the public comment is open, or when it's time for speakers. You just click on the little gray hand next to your name, and we will add you to the list.
Thank you. Do we have any cards for speakers for items not on the agenda?
No, we do not, Chair.
Okay. With that, I don't believe we have any consent calendar items this time. So we can move along to PH1, which is a presentation on and discussion of the housing element update. So with that, I'll turn it over to, I think, Ashley Hefner, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Chair Von Cannon. Ruth, if you could pull up the slides. So, good evening, and thank you for joining us. As you know, we'll be kicking off the housing element tonight, and I'm Ashley Hefner Huang, Advanced Planning Manager. And tonight we also have some of our consultants with us, Veronica Tam, the city's housing element consultant, as well as Eric Yurkovich, our project manager for the lead consulting firm, Framing Associates. So I am going to get us started with some background information, and then Veronica will get into the technical side of things. And is anyone else seeing the slides, or are we still pulling those up?
Yeah, I don't see them yet.
You don't see it?
No.
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 Give us a minute.
There we go.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, you can go to the next slide. Great, thank you. So for tonight's agenda, we'll start by sharing a summary of community input received to date on housing, and go over a brief distinction between the housing and land use elements, go over some of the housing element basics, requirements, and content, review the regional housing needs allocation basics, review the last 5th cycle housing element, 2013 to 2021, and Serena accomplishments, the existing housing programs, the housing element guiding principles, and the process and timeline. Next. Next slide. If it's advancing, I don't see it.
No, it's frozen. Give us a minute, sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks. So as you all know, the housing element update is being prepared along with a comprehensive general plan update. We're about a year and a half into the engagement process for the general plan update GPU project, and housing issues have been a focus since day one, really. As you can see, we've had a few community workshops, multiple general plan advisory committee and housing technical advisory committee meetings, and just recently that study session we had with the Commission and Council in January. So through these events and several online activities as well, we've received great community input on housing and the housing element. And some of the common themes include diverse and expanded range of housing options, providing affordable housing and leading the state to be a model for housing production, and most importantly, affordable housing, addressing the jobs housing imbalance, equitably distributing growth throughout the city, equitable pathways to ownership for wealth building, missing middle housing as a part of the solution, concerns about single-family zoning being exclusionary, and also concerns about eliminating single-family zoning. And the need to be creative and think about solutions like affordable housing overlays, land trusts, and also even subsidized housing. And I'm guessing that most of you may be aware that on Monday night, Council received public comment requesting to agendize a Council discussion on single-family housing and the concern related to exclusionary. I believe that is scheduled for the June 14th meeting, but I'm not 100% sure. So if Saul or I don't think Michael's updated this. If it's not that date, we'll update you.
Do you mind if I ask Ashley? Sorry.
Sure.
I figured Chair Von Cannon, I hope you don't mind, since this is an internal thing, that I ask a question as we go.
Please do.
Okay. I'm not familiar with the definition of exclusionary. It's
a code word for R1.
Yeah, so the theory is that, there's a history of, single-family zoning as a practice in history, not just in Culver City, but across the nation, being used as a tool for, excluding certain races from being able to own properties.
Got it. Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I thought it was some technical term that had a definition behind it, but it's face value. I get it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I would say it's also in a Supreme Court decision. That term was used in a legal case.
Okay.
Where it was made legal to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Barber. That's great. That's very helpful. Okay, next slide. So as they pull this one up, it's on core values. And so I just wanted to take a minute and touch on what the community defined so far as core values. I'm sure y'all have seen these before. So as part of our listening and visioning phase, we asked the community what they see as the community's core values and vision for Culver City's future. And all of that listening helps the team to understand that the community values innovation and creativity, sustainability, equity and inclusion, and compassion and community. So we want to think about how these values inform the GPU as a whole and housing element and the process as they guide how we're going to achieve the community's vision. Next. And also just a minute to go over the vision. So the vision illustrates where the community wants to be by 2045. The policies and actions we draft for each element will then define how we achieve this vision. And defining a community vision and the core values are key to general plans. They provide sort of an umbrella, to use one of Eric's terms, for the general plan, which I think is a nice way to think of it. So, and that includes the housing element. A focus of Culver City's vision for 2045, of course, relates to housing, and specifically that Culver City is a progressive and bold city, leading the region to address complex challenges in housing and other fundamental areas that are critical for the community to thrive. All right, next slide, and Veronica is going to lead you through a few, and then I'll see you on the back side of the presentation.
Great, thank you, Ashley. So housing element is part of your general plan, and you're doing a comprehensive update to the general plan. There are certainly about like 6 or 7 or 8 required elements on the general plan, but the housing element is probably the most closely related to the land use element. What the land use element does is that it sets the stage of future development in Culver City for all land use types, residential, industrial, commercial, public, recreational, open space. All of that needs to be considered in a more holistic manner. And that's why GPAC has been working hard to develop the overall land use distribution and plan as part of the land use policy discussions. We understand that there's been 3 land use alternatives generated by GPAC, and that would be, Ashley is going to talk a little bit about the process of that and the timing of that. But what is important to understand is the housing element has to be consistent with the land use policy. What the housing element does is implement the land use policy, is informed by the land use policy. We have to identify sites that's provided in the land use policy that we can use as residential development in the future. So this plan right now is for the city council and planning commission to determine which preferred land use alternative is going to be included in the general plan, and then from then on the housing element would develop what the sites are going to be used in the housing element for the next 8 years. Recognizing that the housing element is an 8-year plan, but the land use element is the general plan is a longer time frame, usually 20-25 years. I'll go into that a little bit more in the next couple of slides. Next. So the housing element, I think we mentioned before, that is part of the general plan. It's also very different from the rest of the general plan too, that it has a statutory deadline. And no other element has a statutory deadline like that. And the housing element for the city of Culver City being within the SCAG region is required to adopt the housing element by October 15, 2021. There's a 120-day grace period. If you adopt the housing element within that 120 days grace period, you're considered to be meeting the deadline. The housing element, again, is a little bit different from the rest of the general plan. Your general plan usually have a 20-25 year planning horizon. The housing element has an 8-year planning cycle. So think about, the housing element for the new cycle we're talking about, 2021 to 2029, being the first of the 3 cycles that you may, or 2.5 cycles that you may have to fit in within the general plan overall time frame. You're currently still at the 5th cycle. It's not going to expire until October 15. So the new housing element will start October 15, 2021. The other thing that kind of sets the housing element apart from the rest of the general plan is that it has to go through a review by a state agency for compliance with state law. The housing element is also probably the most legally regulated element of the entire general plan. All the requirements are codified under the government code. And when you have very specific legal requirements, there is an agency responsible for reviewing it for complying with state law. And that agency is the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. And so you'll probably be hearing about this agency quite often, frequently in the next few months or so. Next slide. So going a little bit deeper into the requirements of the housing element, one being that almost the overriding requirement of the housing element is that you have to be able to accommodate your projected housing demand as mandated by the state through the regional housing needs allocation process. That's the overriding requirement of the housing element. The virtually no housing element would get a compliance status from the state if it is not able to meet the regional housing needs allocation. So with that, you also have to make sure that you facilitate production. Accommodating is one requirement, but facilitating production is another requirement. The other requirement relates to preserving existing affordable housing. It's very expensive to build affordable housing brand new, so it's very important to preserve the existing affordable housing stock that you have, and also prevent or mitigate gentrification or displacement. Improving the existing conditions of housing stock is also an important requirement of the housing element. And facilitating the development of housing for all income levels and all housing types, including special needs. The state law recognizes that the market pretty much takes care of people who make above moderate income. It's the moderate and lower income households, especially the extremely low income households, that require some kind of assistance in order to get housing within the community, suitable and affordable housing within the community. So the city has an obligation to facilitate the development of housing for all income groups, but the emphasis is on the low and moderate income households. There are also requirements to provide a variety of housing types, and also including housing for special needs population. Under state law, the different populations that are considered special needs are elderly, disabled, homeless, farm workers, female-headed household, and large households with 5 or more members. But oftentimes, local jurisdictions would introduce additional special needs population depending on your own unique characteristics of your community. Some would add artists, and I think Culver City, that is also an important aspect of your community culture. It's important, therefore housing for the artists would also be an important aspect. In other communities, they may add military personnel or college students. So it depends on this, the unique characteristics of the community. And last but not least, in fact, it's probably one of the most important changes in state law, is the requirement for the housing element to address affirmatively furthering fair housing, looking at housing production, housing services and programs with a fair housing lens to it, so that you're looking at housing not only from the perspective of distribution, making sure that you're not concentrating low income or high density housing in one neighborhood, making sure that people have access to housing and housing services, and also making sure that you are addressing anti-displacement and also tenant protection requirements. So this new law is probably going to have the most significant impact in how we look at housing in many communities today. Next slide. In terms of the housing element contents, there are some, again, pretty prescribed. It's very prescribed, in fact, that the housing element contents under state law, we need to look at the needs assessment. But and when we look at needs, we're not just looking at residents that are currently within the city of Culver City. The requirements is to look at housing needs of existing and future residents. Affirmatively furthering fair housing, as I mentioned before, looking at the production of housing or the planning of housing so that you're avoiding segregation, you're promoting access to opportunities, and you're mitigating displacement risks. Constraints is another section that we have to look at in the housing element. We look at market constraints, governmental constraints, and environmental constraints. particularly for governmental constraints. As a local jurisdictions, if you have rules and regulations or development standards that are considered to be constraining to housing development, then you're legally obligated to mitigate those constraints. And market constraints, the new state law also requires cities to the extent possible, mitigate market constraints as well. And we have mentioned before that the most critical component of the HCD's review is the regional housing needs allocation. And that's the part where we have to look at land capacity, how much, where can housing occur within your city that you can accommodate the regional housing needs allocation. So density, capacity, and distribution is what we look at in the resources section. And on top of that, we certainly have to look at your financial capacity, whether you have resources to address some of the housing needs in your community. And housing programs is something that is important as well. Goals, policies, programs, and quantify objectives. We have to be very specific in terms of the city's commitment as to what the city is going to do over the next 8 years, when you're going to do it in order to facilitate and encourage the production of housing, the preservation of housing, and the improvement of housing. And so the sites inventory analysis is what feeds into the adequate sites for RHNA that has a very detailed requirement under state law. Things has to be parcel specific. We have to demonstrate that at a parcel level data that we have adequate sites to meet the regional housing needs allocation. Next slide. In doing the adequate sites analysis, back in 2017, the state adopted a new state law, AB 1397, which really governs how the sites inventory has to be done. We have to identify vacant and underutilized sites with near-term development potential within the 8 years. And specifically for lower income RHNA, now there's a default density, at least 30 units to the acre, is considered to be adequate or feasible to facilitate lower income housing. It doesn't mean that housing developed at 30 units to the acre, 40 units to the acre, or even 50 units to the acre at market, that it would be feasible, or at market that would be affordable to lower income. But state law is using density as a default or as a proxy to feasibility. So at least 30 units to the acre is more financially feasible for...
Excuse me, I have a quick question.
Sure.
When you're talking about underutilized sites, are we talking about sites that are currently used for housing, or is that any site that might have any sort of development on it, but which appears to be underutilized?
It's both. Well, underutilized can be on residential sites if you have sites that, for example, zoned for multifamily, but currently it has only one a single family or duplex on it. Then you have recycling trends in your community that a developer would come in and build 5, 8, 10 units on the sites that we can certainly consider that underutilized sites. And for non-residential sites, we look at a lot of times we look at lot coverage and existing FAR, and also is it uses that are not as exceptionally viable, that they may go away. Typically, if it's like an anchor type of retail, if it's a big box retail or a big office building, then we wouldn't consider that underutilized. But in terms of non-residential, we really look at existing for FAR as one of the, and also year of construction. If a building is brand new, it's very unlikely, even though it may not occupy the entire site or may not be utilizing the site very efficiently, there is little opportunity or that I wouldn't say opportunity, but it's unlikely that a brand new building would be demolished in the next 8 years for new development, even though it may be considered like not efficiently using the land. So we do typically also look at the age of construction and also when was it last significantly improved. If a building that hasn't been significantly improved for over like 10, 15 years, that may be an indication that it's more feasible for that site to be redeveloped. So there are a few criteria that we look at in order to identify underutilized sites. So the state law is using density as a default, as a proxy to feasibility, assuming that at least 30 units to the acre, it's more likely that an affordable housing project can pencil out in terms of financially, or that when they go to the state and apply for something like low-income housing tax credit, the amount of subsidies required per unit is not prohibitive, so that they would not be competitive in the application. So generally, we're looking for facilitating lower income RHNA. We are looking for at least 30 units to the acre. The state also throw in another requirements that the site has to be at least half an acre, but not larger than 10 acres. Those are some of the difficulty that we face. In Culver City, we're probably not going to have to worry about a lot of sites that are larger than 10 acres. What we do have a difficulty would be finding sites that are larger than half an acre. And if they're not, then whether that would be the opportunities for lot consolidation with surrounding parcels as well. So the site analysis is pretty detailed and meticulous when it comes to meeting the requirement of the state. There's another bill that passed in 2017, SB 166, no net loss, that kind of put another higher level of requirement to the regional housing needs allocation. In the past, when you adopt the housing element, you provided the site's inventory, we can accommodate RHNA, you're done. SB 166 says no. Continuously, you have to monitor how your sites are being used as you develop, as the city is developing. If a city continues to build upper income housing or non-affordable housing on sites that are identified for potential lower income, or that the sites comes in, even if it's built at affordable housing, but at lower density than we have assumed in the site's inventory, you have to do a continuous kind of calculation or monitoring to make sure that the remaining capacity you have in your system, in your land use policy, would allow you to meet the remaining RHNA, particularly for the lower income RHNA that you're not meeting yet. So what it does say, that does mean with this SB 166 is you have to continue to monitor how your sites are being used. And when the sites is identified in the housing element, you have to continuously monitor how the sites are being used and replenish your site's inventory if necessary, if they fall below what you would need to accommodate your remaining RHNA as sites are being used for non-affordable housing. So for that reason, the state recommends a buffer of at least 15 to 30 units for the low income category, low and moderate income category. And so in addition to your RHNA, you need to identify more sites above and beyond what you're required for the RHNA in order to compensate for the SB 166 no net loss. So you would not have to continuously rezone and upzone throughout the planning, the housing element planning period. Next slide. So the one thing that we want to actually mention, I kind of talked about that earlier too. The RHNA is only a minimum, it's not a maximum. So this is the minimum number of housing units each community is responsible to accommodate. So we're talking about at least the RENA plus a buffer. But there are two separate requirements. One requirement is identifying adequate sites at the time of the housing element adoption. That's when we're doing the adequate sites analysis, providing a sites inventory in the housing element, demonstrated that you have enough sites for your RENA. But then the next requirement during the production during the 8 years is one, are you producing how affordable housing? It's not a requirement that you build all the units, but it's a good faith effort that you achieve what you can, you set as an objective in your housing element based on resources that you have. But then also on top of that is to monitor for the no net loss, that if you do use up a lot of your sites and not building lower income housing and affordable housing, you need to make sure that your site inventory is replenished so that you would be able to have the opportunity to meet that with production. But in terms of production during the 8-year planning period, the objective can be lower than the RENA, but it's based on resources, and it can be based on resources and programs and incentives that you're going to put in place. And so what you target for would be your good faith effort, what's the best plan that you can put forward, but it's not necessarily needs to be exactly the RENA. Next slide. So just looking at your regional housing needs allocation, the state, the RENA starts from the state, and it projects how much growth is necessary for the entire state over the next 8-10 years. It's 3.5 million units for the entire state. And Southern California Association of Government, being the largest region in the state, we got the lion's share of that 3.5 million units. It's at 1.34 million units, and the LA County get 812,000 units. With the city of Culver City, we're getting 3,341. Units. That's how much we've been allocated as part of the region. This is the minimum number of units that you're responsible for being part of the region. Next slide. The RENA is actually divided into income category, as we mentioned before, that because each city has to provide housing for all income groups. Very low, moderate, and above moderate income. And very low means people who are making 50% of the area median income. For a household of 4, we're talking about $59,000 or so in LA. Low income is 80% of the area median income, and moderate income is about $96,000, and above moderate income is higher than that. So the RENA is divided, in your situation, is divided into about kind of almost split in halfway, about 51% being lower income RENA, and then about 49% being moderate and above moderate income. As we mentioned before, the RENA for the lower income, the default density is about 30 units, is at least 30 units to the acre. Moderate and above doesn't have an established density, but it really depends on the local jurisdiction, how your characteristics of your community, but at least for moderate income, typically that's where we're talking about the missing middle. Those are the mid-range density housing that we're looking for, at least. So next slide. Just kind of looking back at your last housing, well, you're still in the 5th cycle, your current housing element. Your RENA was only 185 units, and the income distribution is slightly different, but it's about 40 41% lower income and about 58 and 9% moderate and above moderate income. The city certainly achieved a lot more in your market rate housing above moderate income. You exceeded that multiple times, but in terms of your low and moderate income, the city was only able to meet about 13% of each category. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Ashley, and she's going to go over some of the existing housing programs the city has and some other additional process relating to the housing element update.
Thanks, Veronica. Well, so as you can see, this is a slide of the existing housing programs. It's a really simplified version of the matrix that was attached to your staff report. So it outlines the city's existing housing programs, and as you can see, there are a lot of programs in the works, including programs that promote housing production, neighborhood revitalization and housing preservation, homeless and prevention programs, and administrative programs. So the housing element update will review these and past housing programs from the fifth cycle as a part of its analysis. Next. Next slide. So I'm guessing you're probably all aware, but City Council approved a set of guiding principles for the housing element in April. They were brought forward by Mayor Fish, and Council approved the principles with some suggested staff modifications, which mainly related to timing and budget constraints. The intent is to reinforce and exceed state requirements, mainly for monitoring progress and adding some flexibility and some sticks to make adjustments in the mid-cycle if we aren't close to meeting our housing production goals. So many of the principles either reinforce state law that's already required or touch on methodology related to how the analysis is going to be conducted for the housing element. And there are a couple of principles, like I just mentioned, Principle 5 and 7. Those have a monitoring component that says if we haven't met our targets, the city will look at making adjustments to facilitate production so that we, do our best faith effort to meet our housing goals. And so as a part of this, Council also approved a phased approach to make sure that we avoid the risk of missing the adoption deadline. The Planning Commission will get an update on the status of this in July, along with the review of the draft housing element before the state's review period. And the status update will outline which principles we were able to meet and those that we may need to follow up on after the adoption deadline. And the thought is that we can take more time to apply those principles, and if needed, we can update and amend the housing element along with the larger general plan update process, which is scheduled to be completed by the end of next year. And regardless, all state mandated components will be met for the updated element to be adopted by December. Next slide. So that's a good segue to the process and timeline. The next time we see you will be at a joint session with Council on June 23rd to get direction on a preferred land use alternative. So we need a preferred land use alternative for the housing element site inventory process to start. And selecting that alternative is essentially, approving it to be studied further for environmental review. And the ultimate land use plan and map that gets adopted next fall may look a little different based on, what the results from the environmental process were and the engagement process for the next year and a half. And so the draft housing element and associated environmental documents will first be reviewed by the GPAC, the General Plan Advisory Committee, on July 8th, and then by the Planning Commission on July 28th. And then the state HCD review of the draft element and CEQA documents, and the CEQA circulation actually also will happen in September and October. Then the commission will review the draft element and any HCD comments that we receive at the November 10th meeting and consider a recommendation to council for adoption. And then council scheduled to consider adoption at their December 13th meeting. Like Veronica mentioned, the deadline is October 15th with the 120-day grace period. There are no penalties if elements are adopted before the beginning of 2022. Next. So before we jump into discussion, I just wanted to have another plug for our land use alternative survey. We want to get it to as many community members as possible. So I greatly appreciate anything you can do to spread the word, and thanks for your patience with our last couple of asks by email to help out. And we're just trying to go through every avenue we can to spread the word. And so the survey results will add to all of the input we've already received on land use and housing over the last couple of years. Next. And also one last push for folks to submit stories and photos to our story bank. It's cool in general, but another cool aspect of it is that the stories and images submitted will be used with our tactical urbanism demonstration project this fall. We're working with the school district to have students come up with ideas and use the stories and imagery submitted in the story bank for inspiration to come up with ideas for the installation. Next. And just a reminder for the public, if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me with any housing element, general plan update, questions or comments, at any time. Happy to answer any questions. And next, our final slide. So we'll open it up for discussion and comments, and we're here to answer any questions and support your discussion. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ashley and Veronica. That was a great presentation. So commissioners, why don't we start with Commissioner Railman? Any questions, comments?
Not beyond what I asked, and there was a couple of times where I was going to ask the question, but later in the slide they got to it. I think it's really it's interesting. I had no idea the kind of intricacies in how the housing element works in the arena, and I was going to ask about how how do we make it happen as a city, and the idea of incentives, et cetera. I guess that's the big table that was part of one of the attachments. Is that correct? Those are kind of some of the funds available to incentivize reaching those goals?
Ashley,
yes,
this is
yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Commissioners, this is Director Blumenfeld. So what you saw there was a summary of our housing programs that were approved by the City Council during our budget hearings. And many of them were in the year prior as well. And some of them are, they're kind of a mixed bag of zoning code amendments to facilitate development. For example, the inclusionary housing, a mixed-use ordinance is meant to help a developer lever more affordable housing through a market rate developments using and combining a state density bonus law and our local density bonus law and a micro unit bonus and AB 2345, which is new state legislation this year. And through that, the combination of those incentives, for example, will be able to lever more affordability and more units. In addition, we have program monies available through the Housing Authority, the Community Development Department administers the Housing Authority program projects. And so there are many of those programs listed on that summary matrix. We also have a number of other programs. You heard Veronica talk about preservation of units. We have preservation programs that will help us keep units in place. We've bought, for example, mobile home coaches, where the units were dilapidated, two of which were hoarding cases that rendered those units nearly uninhabitable. And so we've purchased, restored those, and secured permanent affordability covenants for those. And for each one of these programs, Commissioner Rahman, when we provide some form of assistance, whether it be monetary, usually monetary assistance, but it can be also with levered density, as I mentioned, like with the inclusionary ordinance, mixed use ordinance, we secure a minimum of 55-year affordability covenants for each of the units that are secured. So that's a quick overview, but it gives you a snapshot of the breadth of the housing programs we're operating. We're also looking at, by direction from the council and also the city manager, to look at repurposing other potential buildings like motels to satisfy our need to accommodate the homeless. We're looking at repurposing some former RDA parking lots. And so much of the program money is the result of former RDA, but much of it is leveraged through the market by trying to induce more housing production through increased density. So I hope that's a very quick overview, but I hope it gives you an idea of what's proposed.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Saul. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, Commissioner Rahman, anything else from you?
That's it for me right now. Thanks.
You're welcome. Commissioner Barbara, anything from you?
Yes, I have a list of questions, but I can go for a little bit, and then maybe if you want to come back to me, I'll ask in rounds so as not to...
Get started, and we'll see how long we go.
Okay, great. So a question for a lot of these questions are for Veronica, but I'll just state them, and then whoever is best able to answer them, that would be great. Regarding the RHNA goals for kind of the affordable units, you said that the recommendation was a buffer of 10 to 15 over those units, and I think there's about half of the units are low income in that bucket, right? My comment regarding those goals is if we only achieved, in the range of 12 to 13% of those very low and moderate income units last time, wouldn't a better approach to planning for those affordable units be to essentially identify 8 times as many sites that would accommodate our goal? And I can reframe that question if it doesn't make sense the way I'm framing it.
No, I completely understand your question. There are a couple of things that would, one, we're actually recommending more than 10 or 15%. I think, we said 15 to 30%. But on top of that, there are actually, when you estimate capacity, we don't estimate it at the maximum capacity, because we don't assume that every project will come in at the maximum density. So we usually would have to go with a 70 something to 80%. So of the maximum. So by doing that, you're actually buffering more. The other buffer that I also add into the analysis is that there is a if you rely entirely on primarily on mixed use, you want to build in a better buffer. But I think the question is not so much as the housing element identifying sites, is how the land use element is setting the stage and looking at growth in a holistic manner. So it's not just the housing, it's actually the housing element is relying on the land use element. And so it's not so much that I can just identify sites. It needs to be consistent with your land use policy.
And this is Ashley. I'll just add to that, referencing back to the guiding principles, those were a couple of things that they looked at. One of the principles, number 2, looks at the factors to determine likelihood of development. And the first factor that's recommended is to look back at the, success of the last RHNA cycle. So exactly what you're getting to. And then the 5th one says that, we'll look at that higher rate capacity buffer of 30% to comply with no net loss. And then if by mid-cycle, we're not getting there, we can look at where we're at and then make adjustments accordingly.
Okay, that's really helpful. So does that mean, so just for Ashley or Verma, if you can help me understand about that 30% buffer, and my apologies for getting the buffer percentage wrong. So would it mean that, let's say we need 10 affordable units, are we then identifying the parcels for 13, so 10 plus 30% buffer, or because of the guiding principles and being informed by the previous RHNA performance, are we identifying 10 times 8, which is 80 plus 30%? So it would be 104 times the land. Which one, or is there none of those?
Yeah, what we typically do is, like, when you buffer, for example, look at your RHNA for the lower income and moderate income, you automatically inflate it by a certain percentage, like 20, 30%. That's a buffer that we need to look for sites for. So we're not looking for sites for just the 3,300 units. We're looking for sites for like above that by at least 20, 30%. So that's the starting point of the buffering, and then instead of saying that I have a 1 acre site that at 50 units per acre I can produce 50 units, we usually say, well, no, on average it may not come down to that. So let's assume that we're going to use a 75% or 80%. So the 1 acre site at 50 units to the acre could possibly just accommodate 40 units on average. So you would need more acreage to accommodate the RHNA than you normally would just do a straight math, like divided by the maximum density, we divide by an average density, so that you would need more acreage. So on top of buffering for the 15 to 30%, we are also like buffering another 20% because we're discounting that every project will come in at the maximum density. And then on top of that, we're also hoping to look for sites, so that more sites, so that if we rely on mixed use, there is a chance that mixed use would come in with 100% commercial, that they would not have any residential at all. And so we would kind of like buffer it again. And so, and add more to the acreage that we would need. But having said that, I have to kind of re-emphasize the housing element does not determine how much growth is going to occur in the city. It's the land use element that determines that. So I have to look for what's provided in the preferred land use alternative. And so I think that really is an important message that I want to kind of have it come across, is the land use element that determines where, how much, and what type of housing that's going to talk about. It's part of the general plan. We're all working together, but the land use element is setting the stage.
Okay. Thank you so much for both those responses. That's really much appreciated. And Veronica, perhaps, and sorry, I'm also part of the housing tax. So Veronica, maybe you remember this question. I know there's an issue of timing, right? The general plan is scheduled to be completed until 2022, while the housing element needs to be submitted in 2021. So is that why we're kind of discussing the housing element before the land use element? Because it almost seems like the land use should be going before.
Right, and that's the difficulty that we're facing right now. The housing element has a deadline that is quite a bit ahead of the rest of the general plan, and that you're absolutely right. But unfortunately, we are the deadline is the deadline. Although SCAG is just sending a letter to the state and asking for a 6-month extension, but they've been asking that for more than a year now, and the state has not responded. So I'm not hopeful that there is that extension. But most communities are facing this difficulty because the whole land use discussions requires a lot of attention and certainly community input. But the housing element timeframe is not it's compressed.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that, and I figured that was the reason, but it's good to clarify. The other portion, I know that when we're talking about the affordable unit goal or affordable housing unit goal, there was, I know one of the bullets said good faith efforts, right? Is that alluding to the fact that because affordable housing requires, either a density or some other kind of density bonus or some kind of other funding from the city? Is it alluding to that? Because there's something about the term good faith efforts that seems a little bit like a very soft approach to what the goals are actually stating. Can you help me understand a little bit about that term and that bullet?
Sure. And perhaps you're right that the term good faith effort may not be the most representative of Culver City. But what the state law does say is that recognizing that affordable housing requires not necessarily the city to subsidize, but if you have the funding and the land to do it, that's even better. But in general, an affordable housing unit, each affordable housing unit requires, I would imagine, at least $300,000 to $400,000 of subsidy. And if you build, if your goal is to build 1,700 lower income housing, you can do the math, and there is not enough financial capacity to do it. But you can also do affordable housing without funding from you, such as density bonus. But even if you offer a density bonus to a nonprofit, the nonprofit still needs funding from low-income housing tax credit or some other funding sources that are extremely competitive. So state law allows jurisdictions to say, well, what is realistic to you. With all the efforts, with all the incentives, programs, and funding efforts that you want to do, what is realistic to you? And so that's the commitment that you're going to make in your housing element, and you do the best you can to meet that commitment. And so that's codified in state law, that your quantify objectives can be based on the resources that you have, and resources can be financial, can be incentives, can be other tools.
Thank you. And I'll make this my last question for this round, is since the land use element is largely going to inform kind of what is achievable and where, is the thinking, since the zoning is kind of critical to identifying the sites, are you going to have a draft land use element before the draft housing element returns to the commission?
I am going to have to get access. Well, once the City Council and Planning Commission select a draft or a preferred land use alternative, that's what I'm going to work where the site can be within the proposed land use plan. And I think Eric can answer that question. There may be and I'm gonna just say that there may be some back and forth that I may come back and say, I don't have enough sites. Like, you're not giving me enough. But the whole land use discussions has been so it's been like one of the focus of this general plan update with the GPAC efforts, but it may still come back and say, I need more. But Eric is going to comment on that.
Good evening, Commissioners. I think it's a great question, Commissioner Barba. My name is Eric Yurkovich. I'm a principal at Ramey & Associates, and we're the lead consultant on the general plan update. As you know, as a member of the TAC, we have been working through the land use process. It started back last year with the GPAC, but then we had a workshop with a community in January, Planning Commission and Council meeting, that joint session in January as well, to talk about those land use strategies that helped us create the land use alternatives that we're moving through a public process now. So we did GPAC meetings and the Housing TAC meetings in April, as well as our first community workshop. We did our second community workshop earlier this month. And as Ashley pointed out, we have a survey ongoing. Our plan is to come back to you and to Council in the joint session in June to summarize what we heard through that engagement process, kind of lay out the land use plan in the direction that it's moving, to get your direction, Planning Commission and Council's direction on that land use map, that kind of that preferred map to study as part of the housing element, and as well as the environmental impact report.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Von Cannon.
Thank you, Commissioner Barber. Yeah, how many more questions do you have, just out of curiosity?
Maybe 4 more, but they're very particular, specific to the housing funding programs.
Okay.
So I thought I mean, if you'd like me to continue, I just didn't want to.
Well, I think it's okay for you to go ahead and continue. We may as well go ahead and get them all done now, I think.
Okay. If that's okay with you, then I will
Sure.
continue. Okay. So maybe this is a question for Saul regarding, and I know that I've seen this, the Affordable Housing Program and Policies table. It's been presented in several of the meetings. And I believe all my questions have very straightforward answers. I just don't know what they are. So hopefully I can keep these short. In regards to the program number 1, the Venice parking lot, and I know that there is kind of, the council has already given the go-ahead and this is moving forward. But I just wanted to understand, In a vacant lot where could be, ideal for construction that had kind of a higher housing dwelling unit per acre type density, what kind of informed the decision to do modular residential units?
Sure. This is Director Blumenfeld. The Venice lot is unique in that the redevelopment agency purchased it, and it's in the city of LA. And the city of LA will have to collaborate with us on redeveloping that property. And our thinking was modular units or a sprung shelter would be a quicker route to providing, to addressing our homeless needs or transitional housing needs, and that we could do that more quickly. And that was our hope. Now, we don't know that yet because we still have to have discussions with the council member for that district. And of course, LA has to entitle it. So, and there had been some impetus to build a shelter, both obviously in LA and now from Culver City. So Venice is a unique case. The other lot could clearly, the Virginia lot could clearly accommodate a permanent structure, does not need to be modular. We're just studying it right now, and right at the moment, we've done some preliminary plans, but we might completely, pivot and move into a different kind of structure. But the idea was to try to use these lots for this particularly, basically very low income or homeless population. So that was the reason that we talked about not building bigger structures. Also the timing. If we build permanent structures, it's going to take a long time. If we build modular, we can do it in a matter of months. And sprung shelter is even quicker. So that was some of the thinking behind those sites.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate that. And I remember the complexity of the Venice parking lot now about the being in the city of LA. So I appreciate that reminder. The next, hopefully relative quick question is row 33, the St. Joseph's Center Homelessness Outreach. Is there a reason why there's no budget in 22, 23, and 23, 24?
Well, we just changed the contract with St. Joseph's. They have, frankly, they're charging more for their service. And so we have money budgeted this year, but we're going to have to enter a new contract. And at that point, I'll know what that amount will be.
Okay. And then the final question, and maybe this is not a super straightforward one to answer, but maybe it's something that we can look into at some later time. Per capita, how do we compare on kind of affordable housing programs, or either per capita or per percentage of our city budget? How does our annual budget for these types of programs compare to other similarly sized cities like West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, Santa Monica, and so on?
Well, Commissioner Barba, I think that's really a question for Veronica, but I can tell you that our affordable housing programs are funded with residual funds from a loan from the RDA to the city, and they're currently being paid back since the wind down of redevelopment through a program called ROPS, Reinforceable Obligation Payments, and that is a finite amount of money that we hope to replenish with some of the other programs and code amendments that you've recently approved or will be considering. For example, the inclusionary ordinance provides an option for in lieu payments with a minimum of 10% site if a developer chose that. we're looking at a linkage fee that will help supplement our affordable housing program. But other than that, it's the residual amount we have from this Sparty loan that's being used to program affordable housing and not general fund money. And I guess, Veronica, maybe you can answer part of Commissioner Barba's question.
Sure. I don't have all the numbers in my head, but just from a general impression, I would have to say already Culver City is very impressive with the current kind of slate of programs that the city's been working on. Given a population of your size, a lot of communities in this kind of population have virtually no resources. And there are, I think the most important thing to resources is one thing, financial is one thing, and the community will is very important. You're probably one of the most proactive, progressive communities wanted to actually address the issues. So compared to similar cities of your size, I think you're ahead of the game.
Great, and that goes the same, I guess, for the budget question, right? That means we're ahead of the game on the percentage of our budget that we allocate to these programs.
Yeah, and a lot of cities don't they don't have residual redevelopment funds. It's all gone. They're too small. They don't have inclusionary. They are not intending to do inclusionary. There's no ability to generate funds. And certainly, commitment, I think is important, and leadership is important. And in general, yes, you are ahead of the. I don't know the percentage how far ahead you are with the rest of the groups, but certainly very progressive.
Okay, thank you. And that is all for my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. So, Commissioner Augusta, you're up next. Questions?
Yes, thank you. I need a little clarity or clarification on the timeline, if you will, on the sites inventory. I think I understood that it would be, I think you said next fall that we would see that inventory. Is that 2022 or 2021?
No, that'll be 2021. We'll need to, Veronica will work on the site's inventory as soon as we have direction on the June 23rd on the preferred land use alternative. And then the site's inventory will be included in the draft element that you see on July 28th.
I see. And is there a map that's included with that inventory?
I believe so, yes. And Veronica, I'll let you talk to that.
Yes, it would actually have to be parcel specific, and so there'll be a map, and there will be an appendix that lists every single parcel that we were able to find that would be considered vacant or underutilized. In your situation, is most likely going to be underutilized, and so what we can qualify as underutilized. And typically, we use the age of construction, existing floor area ratio, improvement to land value, proximity to areas that exhibiting trends of redevelopment, properties that already have development interests, and all of these factors are going to be used to identify sites that are provided within the preferred land use alternatives. And that's what we're going to have to do. And so when you see the draft housing element, it will be very detailed.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. One more question, which sort of dovetails with Commissioner Barba's question about good faith efforts, and sort of the same question, but perhaps is phrased differently. What is the penalty for not meeting the housing need? There
is no real penalty yet for not meeting it because RENA is still a planning goal. But by the 4th year of the housing element planning period, HCD, the state, would go in and look at whether you have met half of your lower income RENA or half of your like moderate and above moderate income RENA. If you have not met half of it during midterm through your planning period, then you will be identified as a jurisdiction that is eligible for SB 35 streamlined processing. That would be by right ministerial approval of housing. On the other hand, if the housing comes in with 50% affordable units, but that may not be very, that may not even be very useful to important because part of the new state law requires that we offer by right approval of projects on sites that are going to be made available after October 15, 2021, because your general plan is not going to be available later on. All those sites would be subject to by right approval if the project includes 20% affordable. So the city, because of this land use changes that you're offering as part of the land use plan update, is going to actually provide more than what is required by SB 35. You will be subject to a different piece of law that requires by right approval on projects that are 20% affordable.
Okay, thanks. So just to be clear, there's not really, are there fines for the city if we don't meet it? Like it's really, it just becomes more of a jurisdictional hurdle in a way, but it's not like we're actually fined or anything, is it?
Not at this point, but as we know that the state is continuing to look for other ways to facilitate housing production. That has been a discussion at the legislation level, but not at this point.
Okay. Thank you. That's it for my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Augusta. Vice Chair Sales.
Sometimes I really enjoy going later and listening to the dialogue. Thank you. I think I have a whole series of comments, but I kind of just want to piggyback on Commissioner Augusta's last question and something that Commissioner Barba had said earlier, just for my own edification, right? So, you know, I probably have the advantage or the disadvantage of being the one on the commission that does this for a living, right? And I'm involved in other housing element updates. So much of what's presented tonight is not new for me. And the struggle that I always have, sort of hinting on kind of where Ed was going, is that the housing element is requiring us as a city to come up with land use plans and policies to accommodate a certain intensity of development, right? We're supposed to plan for the ability to create whatever is 3,400 new units, of certain of which have to be affordable and different affordability rates. But there's nothing that says that we have to produce them, right? And I think that Commissioner Barba's question about where the land use plan comes into this, to me, is probably has always been the missing piece in the housing element process, is that the housing element process is about lofty goals and policies, about making accommodations in our plan for future development, but there's nothing that actually then says you have to produce the units, right? So there's always this disconnect every land use cycle when you look back and you say, well, in the last cycle, we only created 20% of the units we were supposed to, and that seems, whatever it is, you know, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, that story seems to be consistent. So having, and I'm Eric, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but having participated in some of the other general plan sessions that were more land use oriented, and unfortunately this is, kind of my thing. It's hard for me to comment on sort of process and policy without concrete measures that actually say, here's what we're going to do and here's how we're going to do it. And so I appreciate all this, but I'm sort of waiting for what I would call the meat of this to come to us to be able to actually respond, right? How is this actually going to be accomplished? What are we actually putting into place to say housing is a priority? We're going to make sure that we have adequate resources, goals, zoning, and process to streamline production. I'm going to use an example, right, as a side note. So National APA was last week. It was a virtual conference. We talked about this on the last commission. It's always one of my biggest, look forward to planning events as a planner a year, because you get to hear what people are doing nationally. And I sat in on this really amazing session of this one city that decided that they were going to, kind of like a Northern California city, say, our single family zoning is no longer going to exist. And they said, we're going to put together programs to accommodate reasonable kind of right-sized intensity of development, et cetera. And this is going to be a priority. And then they laid out the timeline. They said, we're projecting bringing the policy to council in the fall and then the zoning ordinance by January of 23. And I kind of sat there and I went, how are we prioritizing anything if you're telling us in 2 years you're going to bring a policy to council to address a problem that we have today? And so some of this, I use that sort of anecdotally because I feel like land use policy is a lot like that, where we talk about a problem we have today, but the timing is always mismatched. And so this is a little bit of my sort of diatribe, which is I think that the question about where land use fits into this and what are we doing from a zoning and a planning and a programmatic policy is really relevant to how we kind of advise on what we want to, where this housing element process goes. And so there's a lot in which I feel like I can't wrap my head around right now, because a lot of this is concepts, and concepts are only as good as their implementation programs, right? We can all have lofty goals, but they're no good without action. And I think we're a very action-oriented commission. So I think I'm really looking forward to the June meeting for that. So there's I don't think there's much response. It's just sort of my comment on being able to respond to a lot of this, which is I'm sort of waiting for the next step. And I'm hopeful that what comes back to us is a little bit more concrete in terms of proposals and items that say, here were our goals, and these are the things that we would like to put into place. Because without that, we're going to be sitting here and we're going to be reviewing projects that have been sitting in case processing for 18 months, going through the same old, and we're not going to address our housing problem, frankly, if we don't address for some procedural issues and obstacles to getting housing done, which is really a lot of what we have. Eric, I see you jumped on, so maybe I'll stop for a second and then I'll get to some of my actual questions.
Well, Veronica, let me start to answer that question, though I'm not sure I have a complete answer.
It's not really a question. It was more of a statement. But
okay.
Happy to, sorry.
I'd prefer not to just leave that out there, because I think it is a bit misleading. We're working on code amendments right now, one of which we're hoping to bring to you this summer, regarding, for example, making, in terms of streamlining, certain projects of a certain threshold, significantly larger projects of a certain threshold, exempt from anything but administrative review. That's a big deal. And I just want to be clear we're not going to stop trying to be proactive about housing programs while we wait for the general plan update. We just don't have the luxury to do that. But we're not going to have all the boxes checked until Veronica and her team is done with their work and we have a general plan update adopted. So I just want to make that clear, because otherwise I think it's misleading.
I can kind of supplement what Saul is just talking about. There are things that the city, that's on the matrix of the programs that the city is doing that are not dependent on the general plan or on the zoning relating to providing for affordable housing and addressing housing needs. So the housing element certainly is going to reflect that, and to what extent that you want to make it real is it's up to the city council and the planning commission, and just say, well, we want to make it real and we want to do, this is what we want to do, this is how much we're going to allocate for it, this is how many we think we can do. And on top of it, you can have ideas that you build into the housing element that may not be something that you're doing today, but you have 8 years, so you can do something, you can create new programs tomorrow, you can create new programs in 2022. So there may be, the housing element would also speak to that. I'll give you an example. In Long Beach, the housing element that we're working on, one of the program is to create a brand new division in the city, and that's how far they're taking it. And so how much you want to commit to it is entirely up to the city, and we can certainly put a lot more concrete commitments in the housing element, working certainly with Saul and his team, that with the resources that you have. And if you don't have the resources, what would be the ways to generate more money in the community?
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So on that front, maybe I've had this on my mind for a very long time, but maybe something to consider in terms of programs. And I appreciate the effort to try to streamline and make some larger projects ministerial. I think I would like to see some analysis through this effort of lifting the site plan review threshold at 3 units or more. Because I think one of the things, at least in the group session I sat in on the land use alternatives, that I think in my colleagues and things we've heard over and over again, is the desire for people to see sort of in town kind of right-sized incremental development, which means allowing housing in places that maybe currently allow 1 or 2 units in ways that respect size and scale, but allow density. And if we're constantly spending time and energy reviewing 3, 4, 5, 6 unit projects that are taking 18 months or 2 years to come to commission because of procedural issues, then we're hindering what really the objective is some incremental development and incremental intensity, and trying to achieve those numbers in a reasonable way, instead of, I think, what we've all identified over time and what you've all identified, which is there's very few large sites. And really the growth of the city is going to happen, incrementally on smaller sites in a more reasonable way. I think we as a commission see a lot of 4-unit developments that come through. And they're the right size and scale for what we want to see, but they take a lot of time and energy and resources and staff time and our time and designer time and cost. And on the programmatic, things to consider, lifting the site plan review threshold to something more reasonable than anything over 3 would be a big benefit to streamlining. So I'm throwing that out there if you guys haven't considered that. I'd like to kind of go back to some questions though. So something that struck me, Veronica, in your presentation that I thought was interesting that I actually haven't heard before was the prioritization of women head of households as a special needs class. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that in a way that correlates to affordable housing, supportive housing, senior housing, right? Disabled housing as for lack of a better word, classes that are actually defined in the government code and have a classification, right, by the state and otherwise as special purpose housing. Women head of households can be a really broad sector from really wealthy, right? I'm a women head of household, right? But I should not be in that classification of single moms that, right, qualify for some special purpose housing. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit, just for our.
Sure. Actually, female-headed households being a special needs group is identified both in the federal regulations under consolidated planning, governed by HUD or administered by HUD, and also by the state of California in the in the housing element law. Essentially, it is recognizing female-headed households in general. Not, this is all generally speaking, that female-headed households tend to have a higher burden on the responsibility for childcare, and they tend to make lower income and tend to when they have children, tend to have a higher percentage of people who that are living below poverty level. That's the reason why female-headed households as a category is recognized in the state housing element law. That speaks to the same other special needs group. For example, elderly. A lot of elderlies could be, if you go to Beverly Hills, a lot of elderly households are probably very wealthy as well. Large households, the same way. It's not speaking that individual households would not have this issue, but it's speaking to the fact that in general, statistically speaking, female-headed households have higher cost burden, higher percentage of poverty rate, and generally lower income.
Okay, interesting. And then I have a second question that had to do with some of the engagement I think that you referred to, which had to do with the involvement. And I think it was you in your presentation talking about getting some involvement from some of the schools and some of the youth. And it sort of struck me, and I'm wondering, just for informational, kind of what kind of youth engagement has been done in this process. And maybe I'll qualify that, right? Youth engagement is kind of the big new, make sure we're not ignoring that sector of the population in outreach and engagement because they have a perspective that's really valuable, right? We had a measure in front of the city, I think on the last ballot, right, to try and give 16-year-olds the ability to serve on commissions and city positions, and this recognition that there's some value that comes out of it. So I was just really curious, what, if any, engagement's been done to the school and the youth community around here as part of the housing element.
I think actually Ashley or Eric may have to speak to that. That's part of their presentation. But typically, a lot of times when we do general plan, and it's not just the housing element. As a reminder, this housing element is part of the whole general plan process. So the outreach is not just focusing on housing element, but for other aspects of the community as well. But I think Ashley and Eric would be better to respond to that question.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Veronica. And I can start. So I think that was my slide on the story bank that we're working with the school districts on using the story bank stories to inspire the students to come up with installations for our demonstration project. So we've got a couple of ways that we have been outreaching. One is that as a part of our volunteer communications network, we always send all of our meeting information and notices to the school district representatives that we have as a part of that network. Something interesting too is we also just recently got a new GPAC member who's a recent CCHS grad and is involved in actually I think she's involved in some affordable housing advocacy groups. So she, unfortunately, she just started last month, but I'm hoping that her involvement will help to kind of bring that youth voice to our GPAC meetings and discussions going forward. I think that throughout our engagement events, haven't seen a ton of youth come and participate, but there has been some representation at various events. We can always be doing more, of course, and that for right now, that's been the level of engagement. And Eric, I don't know if I'm forgetting anything or if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I would just say I think that's a pretty complete list, but I would say we encountered the Vote 16 group of kids, young adults, in one of our first general plan meetings, and it was truly awesome to get some of their viewpoints. And we did a little pop up, and we got a lot of their feedback on kind of their vision and what they see as some of the key issues in Culver City are. And I think it is really tremendous. And if Commissioner Sales, if you have ideas for how we might engage that population, we'd certainly love to hear those from you as well, or anyone else on the commission.
Okay, thanks. And then I had a series of other questions, but I think they were sort of addressed through the dialogue. So maybe I'll pause there and turn it back over to Chair Von Cannon.
Thank you, Vice Chair Sales. Appreciate that. There's an advantage and a disadvantage to going last, especially when you follow 4 other very smart people. And it shows this evening in that the other 4 folks have addressed all of the questions that I had. So I don't have any immediate questions or comments. So Vice Chair Sales, did you have any other questions, or did you want to just address them during comments?
No, I think I can address them. I think I can address them during comments. I think we should turn back over. I have a lot of, no surprise. I have a lot of questions more about, some process, but they may be misplaced in this dialogue and better, frankly, held for June. Because they just might be, they're just, it's not appropriate to, there might not be enough information or the right people on the phone or the right information with us to address them. So I think I'm going to hold and come back. And if there's an opportunity for them to be relevant, I'll bring them up. If not, I'm going to just park them for June.
Okay, very good. Thank you. With that in mind, let's go to comments or any other final questions. And Commissioner Railman, why don't we start with you? Any final comments, final questions for the evening?
None for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Barber, final comments or questions for the evening?
Yeah, and I'm guessing these are both comments and questions. Where does the FAR, any FAR changes get addressed? Where in the process? Is that part of the land use or part of housing element, FAR and setbacks and other elements of that nature?
Commissioner Barba, the land use element itself, there's actually very few specific requirements of most of the general plan outside of the housing element. But one of the requirements is that the land use element itself has a map that shows the density and intensity of every parcel of land in the city and the allowable uses that are allowed in that area. So the land use element will have that information associated with it. And so through the process of the land use alternatives, and we've been showing those maps initially that you have been a part of the process with, each of those will have an associated residential density and a non-residential FAR, so we can understand the densities of each of those different uses in the community.
Okay, so that's the FAR, and I'm assuming that also that's the same place, that density also addresses the setbacks and anything of that nature. Side and rear setbacks.
So typically things like setbacks, requirements for parking and on-site open space, those are components of the city's zoning code and not components of the general plan itself. That's a kind of a separate detailed implementation component of the land use and zoning.
Got it. Okay, so then I guess here comes my comment. Thank you for answering my question. My comment would be that I really hope the staff considers really unlocking all of the various opportunities for creating the density that not just Arena is calling for, but because we are so job rich, transit rich, and in an age of times that we need to address the climate crisis, we also have a very rich climate. It's cooler. It's so I hope that we unlock all the opportunities by looking at FAR, at front rear side setbacks, at parking requirements, and I hope that is done in some accordance with the land use. And I know that sounds like it's a different process. That's the city zoning. But I hope it's done in some level of accordance with land use and housing element, because I think some of the issues that make it so that perhaps people are not able to build, not just more housing units, but perhaps more housing units that accommodate families, may be able to be addressed by reducing or eliminating parking minimums, by increasing FAR, and by taking a closer look at the current side and rear and front setbacks. So I guess that's the end of my comment. And then the other comment is, I just want to echo Vice Chair Sales about the threshold for review. I think if we really want to encourage missing middle housing, really that threshold of coming to the commission and everything that's involved in bringing those projects before this group needs to be eliminated, and that needs to be more of a by right review just by city staff. I think those are my two main comments at this level.
Thank you, Commissioner Barber. Appreciate that. With that, let's move on to Commissioner Augusta.
Really, I don't have any comments other than echoing Vice Chair Sales' comment of I'm very much looking forward to real specifics on how this is going to be implemented. And that's all from me.
Thank you, Commissioner Augusta. Vice Chair Sales, anything else for this go round, or are we waiting until June?
I don't think I have anything else. I didn't know just procedurally if we have to take public comment.
If there are any, we do have to take them. You're absolutely.
I just wanted to make sure before we felt like we were wrapping up if there's anyone on the phone that we should address.
I am hopeful that Madam Secretary would remind me if there were anybody standing by with public comments, but I will ask Thank you very much. So, Madam Secretary, with that in mind, do we have any speakers on this?
No one had registered. We do have 4 attendees, and I will give them the opportunity right now. If they want to speak, they can just click on the little white hand next to their name, and we will give them the opportunity to speak.
Okay. While we're waiting on them to see if anyone raises their hand, I had just a couple of very quick comments here. First of all, I wanted to compliment Veronica, Eric, and Ashley on the presentation this evening. And Veronica, in particular, I think you added quite a lot of information to our background. That's very much appreciated. I would also echo Vice Chair Sales' comments on ministerial approval. I think that's a very good thought, and I appreciate her bringing that up. And I too look forward to the meeting in June to see what additional information we have. I would also express my regret that I believe that is my last commission meeting. So anything after that point, I will only be able to participate in as a resident rather than a commissioner. So I look forward to seeing the process move forward, and I look forward to continuing participation in a slightly different role. So with that in mind, Madam Secretary, has anyone raised their hand?
No, Chair, no one has raised their hand.
Okay, very good. With that in mind, I believe we are done with this item. I don't believe there's any action to take here. So with that in mind, I think we can just move on to comments from city staff.
Thank you, Chair. This is Michael Allen, the current planning manager. I don't have any particular announcements. We do have, I'm just looking at the calendar here. We don't have any items scheduled for the May 26th Planning Commission meeting. And it's at this time, it's too late to notice anything. And so the May 26th meeting will be canceled, but we do have items lined up for June 9th, June 23rd, and July 14th. We do have items scheduled and calendared for those meeting dates. And so we will have quite a few items coming before you this summer. And I think that Ruth might have an update as well on an item for the commission.
I just want to remind those of you who have not taken the DEI training for the diversity, equity, and inclusion training. HR has been sending out email reminders. The deadline is this Friday, May 15th at noon. So I believe it's just a recording that you need to watch, and you might need to do some type of action at the end, so that it's so you get a training certificate. So just a reminder for those who haven't taken it, this Friday is the deadline. And if you need me to forward the link again, just let me know, and I'll send it over to you. And go ahead.
For information, it's a 2-hour recording, and there are 4 questions to answer at the end, and you have to watch the recording to answer the questions.
Okay, thank you so much.
I had a question about that. I do the same trainings for my job and have a certificate for doing that. Can I, if I send that to maybe Jeremy and see if that's acceptable? Is that who I would send it to?
Yes, or I think I would need to forward it to HR. So if you want to send it to me,
okay.
I'll send it to HR so we know before Friday if you need to take it or not.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Could you let me know that as well? I know I have the same questions with regard to some of the ethics trainings, and the answers come back as no.
Sure. I will ask. Yeah. So I'm not 100% sure if this is just city based. So I'll ask for you and I'll let you know tomorrow morning or as soon as possible, so you know if you need to take it or not.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. If you do have a certificate already handy, if you want to send it to me, and then that way I can show it to them, and they'll have something to look at and decide.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Are there any comments for items not on the agenda?
No, Chair, we do not have anything.
Okay. With that, I will seek a motion for adjournment.
Can I ask just one thing before, just a question / right to staff? So I saw the announcement that the city is taking in-person appointments, which is great. As things start to open up over the summer and everybody's vaccinated, there are a number of large projects in town. The Scopely building and Culver Studios is finished construction and some stuff on that, right? It's been like 2 years since we did a project tour, but there are some things that I would personally love the opportunity to try to tour as a group, whether it's summer or fall, if health permissions permit. Is that something we could maybe start to look into if people were open to it?
Yes, Vice Chair. I think that's something that we can definitely program for this summer as we move back towards some in-person services and identify some sites and schedule a tour like we did 2 summers ago. I think it's a good time to pick that back up.
Yeah, and particularly, I'm really curious to see how the automated parking system is installed and functions at the Scopely building. There's some specific things, not just like, oh, they're really cool projects, but there were things that we spent some time on, and I think it'd be really interesting to see how they actually like get installed and whether they're working or not. Culver Studios is kind of a different story because that's just like, I think we'd all really like to get inside that campus and see what's going on, but a few of them, the same way we did some very specific tours of some very specific things at projects, would be interesting to revisit, especially, with new commissioners starting to come on. Commissioner Barba wasn't here for the last tour that we did. I think it was really beneficial.
Yeah, I missed the last tour also. Would love to participate.
We will we'll calendar something as soon as we're allowed.
Right. That's why I qualified as soon as we're able.
I have a question. Speaking of new commissioners and stuff, does staff know when the council will hear from potential new or incumbent commissioner applicants like myself?
I personally don't know when they're taking action or when they're conducting their interviews. I know that. I'm sorry. I'm just checking the website now.
I happen to know that, Michael. I happen to know that it's June 7th.
Okay.
That they'll be doing this interviews of CBC applicants, Commission Board Committee applicants.
Okay, great. Thanks. Sorry if it's on the website and I just didn't even look.
Good question, though.
Okay, commissioners, anything else? Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, I would seek a motion for adjournment.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second, Commissioner Barba.
Thank you. Motion by Vice Chair Sells, second by Commissioner Barba. How do you vote, Commissioner Relman?
Aye.
Commissioner Agosta?
Yes.
Commissioner Barba?
Aye.
Vice Chair Sells?
Yes.
Chair Von Cannon?
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Good meeting. Appreciate everybody's participation and input, as always. And we'll see you on whenever our next meeting is, June
June
9th. All right. Take care, everyone. Talk with you soon.
Thank you. Good
Good
night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.
Meeting is adjourned at 8:56 p.m.